It started with a letter, not an email, not a message on social media, but a crumpled, yellowing envelope discovered beneath a loose floorboard in the guest room of a centuries-old countryside house. Jack and Eliza, a middle-aged couple on a quiet getaway from the noise of city life, had rented the house for a month, hoping to rekindle their connection after a tense year filled with arguments, distance, and a miscarriage that still hung unspoken between them. Eliza had dropped her earring under the nightstand, and when Jack tried to retrieve it, he noticed a hollow sound from one of the floorboards. Curiosity piqued. He pried it up and found the envelope wrapped in faded cloth. Inside was a short letter, written in delicate cursive, with ink that had begun to bleed into the paper fibers. It read, "If you're reading this, you must be staying in this house. Please, whatever you do, do not dig near the apple tree." That was all. No name, no date, no explanation, just a warning. Jack laughed it off, thinking it was a prank or an old superstition, but Eliza didn't. There was something strange in the air, something quiet but heavy, like a presence that didn't want to be disturbed. She folded the letter back slowly, almost reverently, and said nothing more that evening. The apple tree stood at the far end of the backyard, leaning slightly as if bowing under the weight of time. Its fruit was overripe and pockmarked, its roots crawling across the ground like twisted veins. Eliza couldn't stop staring at it. At night, she said she heard something under it, something like faint knocking or whispering. Jack brushed it off, saying it was probably badgers or tree roots shifting in the soil. But deep down, even he couldn't shake the discomfort that settled in his chest every time he looked at that tree. It reminded him of the cemetery near his childhood home. Still, silent, yet somehow watchful. 3 days after finding the letter, Jack had a nightmare. So vivid, it left him gasping for air. In it, he stood under the apple tree as a voice whispered from beneath the ground, begging him to bring it back. When he woke, his hands were covered in dirt. The sheets were muddy. Eliza stared at him in horror. He had sleepwalked outside. To the tree, his footprints led from the bed, through the back door, and straight to the base of the apple tree, where the ground looked disturbed. Despite everything, Jack's curiosity began to grow into something else. An obsession. He became distant, quiet. He would spend hours just staring at the tree from the kitchen window, unmoving, like it had a grip on him. Eliza noticed how he stopped shaving, stopped eating properly. He muttered things in his sleep, names she didn't recognize, and phrases like, "It's still down there," and she knew. One morning, while Eliza was out running errands, Jack went outside with a shovel. He told himself he would just check, just a little, just to see. The soil was dry and brittle, but as he dug deeper, it grew darker, damper. It reeked of rot and something chemical. Then he hit something hard. It was a box, old, wooden, and locked with rusted metal. Jack pulled it out, heart pounding. As he stood up, he heard a sound, something like a low growl, but it came from nowhere. The tree's branches trembled though there was no wind. He brought the box into the house, washed it, and waited for Eliza to come back. He didn't tell her what he'd done. That night, they opened it together. Inside were old photographs, mostly children, faded and strange. All the kids had the same terrified expression, eyes wide, mouths twisted mid-scream. Some were blurry, as if taken in motion, and one of the pictures, Eliza froze. That's me," she whispered, and it was. A picture of her as a child. in a dress she barely remembered, crying in front of what looked like the same apple tree. She had never been here before, at least she thought she hadn't, but now she wasn't sure. Her memories started unraveling. Flashes of an orchard, a voice calling her name from underground, and a woman's face screaming before being pulled into darkness. She dropped the photo. Jack tried to reason with her, but she was already backing away, shaking her head in disbelief. Something was wrong with this house, with that tree, with her. Her breathing turned erratic. She locked herself in the bathroom and didn't come out for hours. From that night onward, the house changed. Footsteps echoed down the hallway when they were in bed. Whispers crept in from the vents. Shadows lingered in corners a little too long. Jack started hearing voices whenever he tried to sleep. Children crying, calling out for their parents, begging to be let out. Eliza stopped eating, barely slept. She swore something was watching her from the mirror. One night, she screamed, saying a face had smiled back at her from behind the glass, one that wasn't hers. During a power outage, they lit candles and sat in the living room, clinging to each other. The silence was deafening. Then, from upstairs, came a thump, followed by another, then dragging. Jack grabbed the flashlight. At the top of the stairs stood a figure, a child, no older than 10, soaked in soil, eyes pitch black. It pointed to Eliza. "You left us," it whispered. Then it disappeared, leaving only wet footprint. Eliza collapsed. The memories came crashing back in a flood. She had lived here briefly as a child. Her mother had brought her to this house. After fleeing an abusive relationship, the apple tree had been her favorite place, until the day she saw the ground open and a pale arm reach out. Her mother had tried to bury something or someone. Eliza had blocked it all out. It had taken her years to forget. Until now, Jack, overwhelmed, wanted to leave immediately. But Eliza wouldn't. She said she had to know. She had to make it right. She spoke of names she hadn't remembered before. Thomas, Marla, the ones underneath. That night, while Jack slept, she went outside with the box and began digging again, this time deeper, tears rolling down her cheeks. She whispered apologies into the soil, repeating, "I didn't know, I didn't know." The wind howled through the trees like a scream. At dawn, Jack woke alone. The front door was open. Outside, he found the hole, deeper now, far too deep. The box was gone. Eliza was gone. In her place, a single apple sat on the edge of the hole, pristine and red. He called out for her until his voice broke. No answer. He stayed for days, hoping she would come back, but only the wind and the creaking of the apple tree replied. And sometimes he thought he saw movement beneath the soil, like something breathing. When the police arrived, they found no evidence of foul play, just a man broken by grief, insisting that the tree had taken his wife. They called it madness. But sometimes, late at night, Jack swears he hears her voice, soft beneath the floorboards. "I'm still here." And when he does, he cries because part of him believes she chose to stay. It started with a phone call, one of those that come out of nowhere, slicing through the stillness of an ordinary evening. Daniel had just settled into his worn leather armchair, sipping a glass of red wine, when his phone buzzed. It was from a number he didn't recognize. Normally, he would have ignored it, but something compelled him to answer. "Daniel Marlowe, This is Officer Jenna Ruiz from the Sheriff's Department in Chestnut Hollow. I'm calling about your uncle's property. You're listed as next of kin. We found something during a routine excavation. We think you should come down here." Daniel hadn't been to Chestnut Hollow in over 20 years. His uncle's old countryside home was where he spent parts of his childhood summers, a place filled with odd smells, creaking floors, and long silences. His uncle had passed away recently, but Daniel hadn't felt the urge to visit until now. Driving into the town was like entering a time capsule. Nothing had changed. The diner with the rusted sign, the gas station that still used manual pumps, and the church bell that tolled too often. Daniel parked his car in front of the sheriff's office, where Officer Ruiz greeted him. Her face was pale, and her tone was laced with unease. "We were clearing out the old shed behind your uncle's house. The ground caved in underneath one of our guys. When we looked closer, Daniel, we found a sealed wooden box, and what was inside, it wasn't right." Daniel's heart began to thud. He followed Ruiz to the property, his eyes scanning the overgrown fields, the leaning fence, and the crooked silhouette of the house. It all looked smaller than he remembered, but something about it felt heavier, like the land itself was burdened with secrets. The shed had collapsed partially, revealing a dark, damp hole beneath the rotting floorboards. A crime scene team was already there, carefully documenting everything. The box lay nearby, opened. Daniel stepped closer and froze. Inside was a collection of small, decayed bones, but they weren't animal bones. The sheriff's team was sure they were human. And not just that, there were remnants of children's clothing, tiny buttons, a rusted toy soldier, a pacifier, its rubber yellowed with age. Daniel recoiled. "You think this was under my uncle's shed all this time?" Ruiz nodded slowly. "And we think this might not be the only one." Shaken, Daniel wandered into the house. Dust coated every surface. The musty air clung to his lungs. Memories flashed. His uncle sitting silently in that same armchair he used to avoid. The way he locked the basement door at night. The old radio playing lullabies with static. In the attic, Daniel found an old trunk. Inside was a stack of notebooks. His uncle's journals. The entries began normally, crop reports, mechanical notes, but by the third book, the tone shifted. There were drawings, diagrams of the property, and then names, dates, ages, children's names. Some pages had dried stains, others had been ripped out violently, but one passage chilled Daniel to his core. The whispers come from the ground. They call for the innocent. They demand silence. Daniel questioned the only remaining neighbor who had lived next door for decades, Mrs. Hawthorne, a frail woman with a brittle voice and glassy eyes. When he asked about his uncle, her lips trembled. "He wasn't always like that," she whispered. "But after the storm, something changed. The land behind the house. It wasn't right after the lightning struck. Animals ran from it. The earth gave off a smell, sweet and rotten. He started digging at night. Said he was building a storm drain, but I knew better. I heard screams." Daniel felt nauseous. The image of his quiet, stoic uncle now twisted into something monstrous. The property map in the journals hinted at a second location. Near the orchard, where the trees grew in unnatural spirals. Daniel and Ruiz went there with a team, digging cautiously. Hours passed. Then the shovel hit wood, another box, this one heavier. When they opened it, there were more bones, but not just children. An adult skeleton lay there too, shackled at the ankles. A woman's locket was still clutched in her hand. The picture inside had long faded. Ruiz looked pale. Who was she? Daniel's throat tightened. I think that was my aunt. Among the artifacts was an old reel-to-reel tape recorder. They played it back at the station. The voice was unmistakably his uncle's. I tried to stop it. I swear to God I tried. But it wouldn't let go. It needed them. Every 7 years. It whispered their names. If I ignored it, it screamed. It turned the house against me. Against her. I buried the truth. But it always grows back. The tape ended in a hiss and a distant cry. Daniel couldn't sleep that night. He walked out to the property again, standing where the boxes had been unearthed. The wind was still, but then he heard it. A faint murmur like voices rising from the soil. He dropped to his knees. The earth was warm. Jason Reynolds never intended to buy land, especially not a secluded, heavily wooded acre in rural Maine. But at a local estate auction, something about Lot 43 drew him in. Maybe it was the map, with its crude ink marks around a clearing labelled only X. Or maybe it was the way the old man who ran the auction suddenly lowered his voice when reading its description, like the land itself might be listening. Jason, a recently divorced architect in his early 50s, was seeking a project to distract him, something to anchor himself after months of therapy, sleepless nights and unanswered questions. The price was suspiciously low. No one else bid. It was as if people intentionally avoided it. "You sure about that one, Mr. Reynolds?" the auctioneer asked as Jason signed the deed. "Why? Something wrong with it?" The man paused, looked over his shoulder, then muttered, "Just don't go digging around there. Let what's buried stay buried." 3 weeks later, Jason arrived at the property with tools, blueprints, and a head full of plans for a minimalist cabin. The trees were dense, the silence unnerving. Birds avoided the clearing. It was shaped unnaturally circular, the soil darker than the rest, almost black. Despite the warning, he felt an odd pull toward that X. He told himself it was probably an old fire pit or the remnants of some logging camp. But at night, inside his camper, he heard something he couldn't explain. Not animals, not the wind. It was a low hum, almost like chanting, from deep within the trees. One night, unable to sleep, he took his lantern and walked to the clearing. The soil felt softer here, like it had been turned recently. His foot sank slightly. Curious, he marked the spot and decided to dig in the morning. The next day, Jason dug 2 feet down before hitting something hard. Wood. But it wasn't a coffin or a box. It was a lid. Flat and splintered, like a trapdoor. He cleared the rest of the soil, revealing an old wooden hatch, sealed with iron nails and what looked like dried herbs stuffed into the seams. Something ancient and primal told him not to open it, but his hands moved anyway. The smell that escaped when he pried it open wasn't rot. It was something older, something wrong. Stairs led down into the earth, carved crudely into stone. The air was still, too still. He descended 5 steps before his flashlight died. Then came the whisper. "You opened it." Again. He scrambled back up and sealed the hatch. For hours, he sat outside, pale and trembling, trying to convince himself it was a dream or a hallucination caused by stress. But that night, his dreams changed. He saw children, barefoot and blindfolded, Standing in the clearing, they chanted in tongues, circling a man tied to a post, screaming as flames rose. Every time the man cried out, the children laughed. The next morning, Jason returned to the hatch. Around it, symbols were now scorched into the soil. He hadn't carved them. And his camper door had been left open, though he was certain he locked it. Inside, written on the mirror in mud, were the words, "You've brought the eyes back." He found the journal under a loose plank in the camper floor. It wasn't his. The leather was burnt around the edges. Inside, the writing varied, some in English, some in Latin, and some in symbols that twisted painfully to look at. It belonged to a woman named Eliza Crane, dated 1910. She spoke of a burial ritual to seal away the seeing one, a being that fed not on flesh, but guilt. She warned, "It hears lies, it sees shame, the ground drinks secrets." Jason read on, learning the children had once been part of a cult, orphans taken from nearby towns. The townsfolk revolted, burning the cult alive. But something beneath the earth survived, and it wanted out. The dreams became unbearable. He saw his ex-wife, pale and weeping, accusing him. He saw himself saying nothing when he should have said everything. He relived the miscarriage, the late-night fights, the betrayal. The forest whispered them back at him. The trees echoed his failures. Every step on that property felt heavier, like the land knew. One night, he awoke to the sound of soil shifting outside. He looked out the window. Dozens of small figures stood in the clearing, children, blindfolded, smiling, waiting. Jason snapped. He tried to flee, but the forest never let him reach the road. Every path turned him back toward the clearing. Food spoiled instantly. Water turned black. He tried burning the hatch. The fire stopped at the edge of the clearing. He started writing. Eliza's journal had continued, pages he hadn't seen before. "You must confess to the dirt. Say it aloud. Let the earth judge you." He screamed his regrets into the soil, sobbed them, begged forgiveness. And then one final voice answered. Too late. They came that night, blindfolds lifted, eyes hollow. They buried him beneath the tree at the center of the clearing. Not dead, just trapped, breathing forever.